For the latest reaction on Capitol Hill to the deadly train derailment in Washington State, Congressman Adam Kinzinger joins me. He is a member of the House Foreign Relations Committee, and I want to talk to you about the president's speech. But first, Amtrak, obviously a really big subject there on Capitol Hill. Your first immediate reaction to today's development?
Yeah, it's sad. And, you know, part of the reason it's such big news is because it's so rare, so I think that's important to point out. But especially this being, in essence, the maiden voyage of this, there's going to be a lot of information we need to gather. The first thing you're concerned about is an untoward act or a terrorist, derailment, anything like that. I'm not making that implication. But that's the first thing you have to be worried about. And then secondly, what went wrong? Was it taking a speed too high around a curve or something like that so that something like this doesn't happen again? It's just tragic.
It is just incredible that this was the first time that train had people on it, the very first time. And so I share your concern. Of course, everybody would, about how it actually happened. And NTSB was on earlier, and that was an initial brief report, and they're going to continue to update us. In the meantime, we had live in this hour President Trump's remarks on his new national security strategy. I understand that you've had a briefing on the policy. Your initial thoughts?
Well, I think the speech was good, and I think the strategy is good. And we have 8 years where we basically walked away from a lot of parts of the world, whether it's Asia, whether it was Europe, or whether it was the Middle East. President Obama spoke a great game, but really didn't follow through in action. So now we're having to wrestle back that 8 years of lost control, and it's going to be a long process. It's going to be difficult. The president's speech was good, talking about the pride in America, talking about America being on top again. We have a strong economy, as we're hearing. We could potentially even approach 4% GDP growth. That's the engine for us to have the impact we have on the world. But the key will really the action to follow. We look at Syria. Syria is a big concern of mine. The growing influence of Iran in Syria, the growing influence of Iran on the border of Israel. We look at the growing influence of Russia. This is going to take some time to push back. And of course, North Korea. We need to invest the resources, and the president, I believe, will and needs to follow through this speech with great action.
He talked about readiness and the importance of it, and I know that as soon as you all finish with this tax reform proposal and get that to the president's desk, I assume, by the end of the week, I understand that you want to turn to military readiness and the problems there. You, of course, are in the Air National Guard, and I wonder just how desperate is the military to have those sequestration caps removed and to begin to rebuild so that our troops have what they need.
Well, we're all desperate for it because this is a stupid policy. Sequestration was, if you think back to the history of it, built to basically never happen, to be such a sort of Damocles that we'd never actually allow it to happen. And instead, out in Washington, D.C., we basically allow this to happen every year, and we have to negotiate ways around it. And so I think we'll negotiate a way around this to be able to invest in the military. But, we can't, on the one hand, and this is what kind of annoys me about some of the folks out here, is they talk about the need to bomb ISIS, the need to do this and this and this. And then they fight for these budget caps because they don't understand that you have to invest if you want to follow through and say we have to be willing to take a stand against North Korea or ISIS. So it's time that we marry our rhetoric out here with real action, and this will be the best way to do it.
One of the things that presidents always deal with is the unexpected, such as 9/11. There are other things that pop up. Do you think that this new national security strategy gives the United States a blueprint from which to work in making decisions no matter what comes its way?
I do. And I think the president has a good team around him to be able to fight these challenges. Something new is going to pop up every day. Probably no administration's ready for no administration would have been ready for 9/11, for instance. So, thanks and off guard, but we have the best people in place. We have a president that's willing to say America's on top again, and our men and women of the military and our first responders are incredible. So I think we're equipped, but we've got to invest the resources to make that document a reality.
And do you think, are you satisfied and happy with the tax reform bill as it is, and will you be voting for it this week?
Yeah, I will be voting for it. This is better than the House bill, better than the Senate bill. We can always find something maybe we don't like in it. I like this, and I think this is going to be a great engine for the economy, and hopefully these 4% quarters like we may be having can go off into the future. So that'd be great.
And we were told that could not happen again, 4% growth in a quarter, so we'll see. All right, Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you so much for being with us today.